So we're going to start with Mr. Stuart Baker. So the floor is going to be given over to you. Now, Mr. Baker is Deputy Director with the UK Department of Transport and Deputy Chairman of NETLIPSE.
Excuse me if I stand, I think I'll probably present slightly better. Yes, I've been responsible in the last 10 years for a lot of major projects in the UK, totalling actually over £20 billion worth of projects. But NETLIPSE is formed of people who actually deliver projects physically, people like me who sponsor and pay for projects, and academics as well. So we've got a large mixture of experience of projects. The E part of NETLIPSE, you can see on the screen what NETLIPSE stands for. The E part, the European part, is very important to us for two good reasons. One, we're concentrating on projects in Europe, and two, the Dutch tell me that if you take the E off the end and put it into Google, you end up with a pornographic site. So for two reasons, E is terribly important to us. But we do work within most European countries, in the EU area, and also several outside. We've been working for about 10 years, and different phases of NETLIPSE. The first bit was just simply a knowledge network, getting to know what makes projects work. And we did some research on 15 projects, supported by the Commission, and then we moved on and developed the knowledge network. And we developed, I'm going to spend most of this time talking about the IPAT, the Infrastructure Project Assessment Tool. We did this work to see whether it was viable to produce a numerate tool to assess the health of the project, to actually prevent the very thing that was just mentioned about projects failing or projects overspending. We were trying to understand whether we could work out a numerate system for measurement of the likelihood of success of a project. So we then moved on to the third period, and we maintained the network, and now we're in a new time of NETLIPSE 4, as we called it, 2013 plus, and we're starting to actually use the Infrastructure Project Assessment Tool. Let's go back to the first phase. We looked at projects all across Europe, rail and road, cross-border, bridges, etc. So a good spectrum of projects were researched, and we did full formal reports on each one. We actually wrote, as a result of the work, we wrote this book, and I'll explain at the end, but that's available on our website in PDF form still, and it's managing large infrastructure projects. And if you like, it's almost as simple as a recipe book. Follow this, do it, and you stand a far better chance of having a more successful project. So that was published in 2008. We have the individual project reports, which were agreed with each of the projects. But then was the challenge. Could we do a tool with a reasonably accurate scoring system to tell you whether a project was likely to succeed or not? So the objectives of the Infrastructure Project Assessment Tool, the IPAT as I'll call it from now on, it was to assess the quality of the management, the processes, the wide project, and to get the objectives and the outputs. Many projects are part of programmes. They're interlocking projects that together deliver the outputs. The former chairman of NETLIPSE was responsible as project director for the building of HSL Zoud in the Netherlands. And yet other parts necessary to get the final outputs, notably the trains, have been less successful and even 8 or 9 years on, there's still not the full service as planned to connect Brussels, Rotterdam and Amsterdam. So you have to cover all of a project or a programme to make sure you get the realisable benefits. So it's very relevant, it's very relevant and to predict a project, to see how likely it is to succeed. And of course, again, taking that very point just made, if a project isn't ready or isn't ready to move to the next stage of delivery, for goodness sake, stop, get it right, and pause and start again when you're ready. Because projects can burn a very huge amount of money very quickly in the wrong direction and with waste if you don't get them right. So it's relevant to projects and programmes. It's very relevant to the corridors. It can be used for small, large and huge projects. The biggest project we've used it on was £9 billion. So it's to assess the fitness of a project. Is it fit? It's no use starting a marathon if you're not fit. And projects are indeed marathons. It's not trying to tell you whether something could be done or might be done or whether it's feasible. It's to check the underlying processes. Have you done a business case? Is it valid? Is it secure against changing circumstances? And really, an IPAT assessment with a qualified team can tell you whether a project is more at risk of overrunning in time or cost. It can be used at any stage, and this was one of the numerous challenges for us. We wanted to be able to use the IPAT when a project was just starting, or indeed for a post-project evaluation. So we wanted to be able to use that at any stages. And then in terms of the IPAT model, you've got different parties in a project. You've got obviously the people paying for it, the sponsor, you've got the delivery organisation, you have the stakeholders. And each of the themes we study as part of an IPAT, and I'm going to put these up fairly quickly, you get the linkages between the various parts. And if the links between a project are not clear, if what you want isn't clear, all the various subjects, if you're not clear, again, don't start, because you will be burning money. So just picking up quickly as I go through, you'll see the various parts that we study. So we go in depth into the project and look at the different themes, the 12 different themes, from is it politically wanted? We've come across projects that have been seesawing around, yes we will, no we won't, dependent on the change of governments. Have you got the funding? Various things like that. Practical, straightforward, and immensely simple questions. But quite often we've found that people who are actually immersed in the project are so busy getting on with it that they don't have the time to think and review and work out the answer to those questions. And again, if you don't know the answer to the questions, you're going to fail at some stage. So the process itself, we get a background document, we collect information, we appoint trained assessors, we do a site visit, we spend most of the time with in-depth questioning of people linked to the project. We write a report, we discuss that report with the project and the sponsors, and we've never failed to come to a consensus about the wording of the report. And that has both the current state and, very importantly, the recommendations as to what you should do. So it's scored by those sub-themes that we work out, so that the 12 topics actually have 27 sub-themes between them. So there's quite a lot of scoring, and the assessors come to an agreement on the scoring, moderate them. So a typical question would be stakeholder identification. To what extent have you identified the right stakeholders for the next stage of the project? And stakeholders vary. At the start, it's the people who are for the wider outputs, the opponents of the outputs. And then as time goes on, it's very often the neighbours that you're disturbing with the building of the project. It becomes much more discrete down to individuals. So are you ready to manage and get the stakeholders as best you can on side and to work with you? So that's just one of the sub-themes. But you can see from that question and the things to investigate that they're practical, straightforward questions. We use a 4-point scoring, very negative, negative, positive, or very positive. In our experience, a 5-point scoring, it's so easy to give everything the middle score of 3. So this actually forces thinking as to whether something is slightly negative or slightly positive. And that has worked very well indeed. And there are very different times when a project takes place, right through the life cycle. And the importance of each one varies according to the project. Financial control is clearly important throughout, but the physical building is a very different stage from the obtaining the consents or the post-project operation. So what we have done is worked out which of the themes is more important at what stage of the project. And that, for example, is the IPAC results for 4 stages of the Gotthard Base Tunnel. And, as you might hope, they became better as each stage went on. The knowledge, the issues were much more understood, and they were ready to attack the mountain and construct the longest tunnel in Europe. The scoring system can be put by theme, and you can see on that one the strong points, the excellent strong points, and some of the weaker points. But there are different ways of describing the scoring. This is actually my preferred one, which is, if you get that lozenge of green in the middle, if you're in that area, then your score is close to the importance of that stage. So any outliers from that green band are obviously either you're doing really well and more than you need, but that doesn't really matter. But the critical purpose is to assess where you have shortfalls. Or you can do it via a spider diagram. There's different ways of assessing, and for different people and different projects, the results can be shown in different ways. It's important that the assessors are properly qualified and regulated, that a standard is maintained across Europe. So we have set and appropriate criteria, because people have to be experienced in projects to be able to do the assessment. It's not a sort of mathematical tool that you can just sit down. You have to be able to understand the different stages. So we've worked hard to make it practical and straightforward. We've done pilot assessments. The first one of those, the West Coast, was the one I took over after it had collapsed, but we were able to do a project that was an absolute disaster. And that was really important for the calibration, right through to some of them that have been absolutely fantastic, some at different stages. We had the knowledge to do the Gotthard Base Tunnel at 4 different stages. And we're now practically starting to use it, planning to use it in Sweden, and we have a date for a road project assessment in the Slovak Republic. So it's really important to be able to assess a project and to understand whether it's likely to succeed or not. It can be used to monitor a project. You can use it, the Commission could use it for monitoring the likelihood of success and even possibly link it to grant regimes. So, but the main purpose of everything is for project improvement, to improve projects in planning and execution, and to go back and understand whether a project has been successful. So it's a really useful, down-to-earth tool, can tell you whether a project is going to be good or bad or indifferent. And particularly the point was made about the control of projects. Masses of information is on the NETLIPSE website, www.netlipse.eu. There's PDF of various brochures and books and so on that we've published. There's some outside, and there's a group of NETLIPSE people in the middle, sort of second row from back there, if you wish to have a discussion with them at the coffee break. And there's an invitation for anyone to join us for the next NETLIPSE meeting in Bratislava. So that's, in a nutshell, what we do, and our prime objective is to improve the quality of projects and to stop the waste of money.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Stuart Bake.